Right. Hello, everybody. My name is Karen Wyville. I am the Associate Director of the Central Ohio District of the Ohio Apex Accelerator Program at Ohio University. Today's webinar is co-sponsored by other Apex accelerators that I would like to acknowledge today. Our co-sponsors include the Southern Ohio Apex Accelerator, the state of Arkansas's Apex Accelerator, and the state of Missouri's Apex Accelerator. We are pleased to offer this webinar. Today, we're going to be hearing from Mr. Kareem Sykes of Project Spectrum. Kareem Sykes, I just had the honor of seeing him in person presenting on Project Spectrum services, and he provides a very informative, dynamic presentation. And if you ever get to see him in person, the man knows how to make an entrance, I can tell you. So I'm going to be turning this away. Just a little point of order. We are going to be taking questions at the end. However, there is a chat feature in our meeting. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Members of Kareem Sykes' team will be answering. And any question that we don't get to in the chat, we will go over at the end of the session. Again, honor, take it away, Mr. Sykes.
Well, it's hard to follow an intro like that, Karen. Thank you so much. My goodness, I appreciate the opportunity as always. Always a blessing and just a privilege to be able to talk to you guys, our Apex accelerators. Again, thank you all for coming together and having us here to talk about cybersecurity and defending your small business in cyberspace, right? So something that is all too germane in the climate with which we find ourselves. And so with that, I'm going to dive right in here. So what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about Project Spectrum being, in essence, a DoD-supported initiative that's helping small businesses around the country understand the myriad of resources that are there for them at the ready to help them on their cyber compliance journey. So everything from we're going to talk about training. We're going to talk about education and awareness. We're going to talk about actual tool provisioning, right? Actionable things that companies can take advantage of at no cost to them, right? So that's the groundwork I want to lay. And then in terms of what we're doing specifically to help those small businesses with cybersecurity, we're talking about education, right? So helping those businesses understand the landscape and the particular threat vectors that they face doing business with the DoD, and specifically being in a critical part of the supply chain. And so when we think about provisioning of an overview of federal regulations, that is absolutely germane because there is a lot of policy behind what we're talking about. It's how are we helping educate those small businesses on the policy piece of this, right? Giving those businesses data and guidance on the regulations, right, that they're going to be obligated and held to. Briefing businesses on the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Process, or CMMC, as it were. Providing them an overview of it, helping them understand the scope of it, and then, of course, working with them on the gap assessments that Project Spectrum provides. And so it's helping them understand, for example, when self-attestation suffices, meaning when you can take a self-assessment and have that be the means by which you're meeting the sort of compliance litmus test, and also when that's not the case, and when you do need to get certified with a C3 PAO, right? Providing an overview of how Project Spectrum can help with the CMMC journey, right? So how is it that we're helping you along that whole journey, right? Looking at ways to eliminate cost, looking at ways to still be compliant, and of course, looking at how we can improve that cybersecurity posture. So the threat landscape. Well, we know that in no uncertain terms, some 40% of all cyber attacks are targeting small and medium-sized businesses. With a degree of certainty, we know that only 28% of those small and medium-sized companies have plans in place to mitigate those attacks, right? So it's, again, critical and crucial that we understand those dynamics. We know that almost 3/4 of the breaches are caused by human error. And what does that tell us? Well, that tells us that there's a huge education and awareness gap, right? Among other things, right? When we think about the cost of a cyber attack, between $826 all the way up to $653 or $63,000 rather, for a cyber attack, right? So against a small and medium-sized company. So we think about the fact that only 14% of those small and medium-sized companies have the proper insurance coverage in place, that speaks to probably an awareness of even knowing that that's something that's available, right? And so we want to help bridge gaps like that. We think about intellectual property concerns, access to sensitive government information, the interconnection with larger defense contractors, and then access to the supply chain in general, and then of course political and ideological motivation, right? Both here and abroad, right? We know that foreign and nation state actors are looking to thwart the supply chain in any way that they can. And if that means going after a micro small or a smaller company to get to that larger prime, to get to that higher value area within the supply chain, then that's exactly what they're going to do. And we've seen it in a myriad of ways that that's done. So what's important about this whole thing that Project Spectrum helping with regard to CMMC? Well, we're helping you understand that when you're handling federal contract information or you're handling controlled and classified information, we're helping you understand the regulatory pieces that appertain for both of those. We're also helping you understand what that's going to necessitate in terms of the level of compliance that you'll need with regard to CMMC, right? So we know federal contract information is going to be relegated to level 1 for CMMC, and that when we're talking about CUI or controlled and classified information, that is where we're getting into level 2 and level 3, depending on the criticality of it. And we'll talk a little more about what that looks like as well. We think about foreign ownership, control, and influence. You might say, well, Kareem, what does this have to do with cybersecurity? Well, when we think about foreign ownership, control, and influence, again, it's a state that may affect a company's ability to qualify for and maintain eligibility to even be able to contract with the government, specifically the DoD. And so we think about estimates showing that some 50% of all espionage within the U.S. manufacturing is due to some sort of foreign ownership, control, or influence. That's critical, right? That's a pretty alarming statistic. When we think about cyber and we think about IT, we're most associated with information technology. Well, there's operational technology concerns, certainly in the manufacturing arena, that we want to make sure that we're educating folks about and helping them become best positioned for success with. And so as you can see in the FY23 NDAA, Section 875, calling for the establishment of a program that demonstrates commercial due diligence tools, techniques, and processes, right? So we're talking about, again, this recurring theme of helping folks at Project Spectrum, helping folks with regard to FOCI, properly identify, evaluate the impact of, and ultimately reduce those foreign ownership, control, and influence risks associated. And that's very closely tied in with cyber, right? Because we know that, for example, there are things like what's called an artificial attack surface that many offensive cyber folks will tell you is a great way to sort of look at how we can see what is it that nation state actors are going after with those small businesses they're targeting, right? What areas of information of their network, of their infrastructure are they trying to exploit? And if we can see that on an artificial attack surface, we can kind of create different mechanisms by which we can thwart those folks that are trying to do that. And again, foreign ownership, control, and influence steeply tied in there from those foreign actors. When we think about the CMMC model, we know that we're talking about 3 distinct levels. We're talking about the foundational level, again, handling FCI only. We're talking about CMMC level 2, considered as advanced or enhancing data safeguarding for businesses that handle CUI at either a prioritized or non-prioritized data acquisition level. We'll talk about that as well. And then, of course, CMMC level 3, the highest or considered as expert for high capacity safeguarding for CUI. Again, think of the highest priority programs, highest level of criticality of information there in the unclassified space, which, by the way, that's a good point to highlight. When we think about CMMC, we're talking about information handling, processing, storing, or transmitting of CUI or FCI, again, all of which are in the unclassified space, right? So we're not talking about any kind of classified data. Those respective levels you can see in that chart there below. There's some key points of distinction we'll talk about on subsequent slides, both in terms of the assessments, the models itself, and then, of course, the distinctions there in between in this area, right in here, right? So assessment requirements. CMMC level 1, well, we know that annual self-assessments for all defense industrial base contractors that handle FCI data is going to be required at level 1, right? So you do have to do a self-assessment for level one. And so what that means is there's no actual certification issued for level one, right? That's one of the misnomers with regard to CMMC. So at level one, to be compliant, the contractors needs all findings to result in a met or non-applicable status. And so those self-assessments must be submitted to the supplier performance risk system or otherwise known as SPRS. And then of course, when conducting self-assessments, the CMMC certification is not required at this level one because you can self-attest, right? So you don't need an actual certification at that level. The score and the self-assessment that you get from level one, when you upload that to the supplier performance risk system, you will have met the litmus test, for that requisite level of compliance. And again, all of these resources I'm going to talk about today are at no cost to small businesses. One of the biggest deals, if you will, with regard to what we're doing now. So when we think about CMMC level 2, there is a bifurcation, if you will, or split that occurs toward DIB contractors that handle either prioritized or non-prioritized CUI in the context of the data that they're handling. And so when we think about non-prioritized, we're thinking about still CUI, right? Because we're talking level 2. It's where self-assessments are allowed. Businesses can create still financial savings by using Project Spectrum's assessment tools, training, and cyber advisory preparation services, right? So CMMC certification is not required in the case specifically of a non-prioritized data acquisition. I'm just going to pause here for just a brief second. Okay, hopefully you guys can still see and hear me there. Okay, so CMMC, again, certification is not required or issued in a non-prioritized CMMC level 2 situation, right? So, and you're saying to yourself, well, Kareem, how am I going to know if it's non-prioritized or prioritized? Well, the solicitation itself, by way of the procurement officer that would have issued it, will specify in no uncertain terms if, in fact, it is a non-prioritized or prioritized acquisition. And so you'll know by way of that. But even in the case of a non-prioritized acquisition, that last bullet there, scores are uploaded to the supplier performance risk system. And then, of course, in split B, we're talking about a prioritized or sensitive CUI data acquisition. In that case, the triennial every 3-year cycle assessment is required. You do need to meet with the C3 PAL, and that again is because it's been deemed a prioritized acquisition, and therefore necessitates you having to meet with a certified third-party assessor organization, or C3 PAO, as it were, right? But even in those cases, you can still, as you see in bullet 3 there on the prioritized side under split B, you can see where that financial savings is still garnered because all of that preparation work that you will have done on projectspectrum.io, that is the looking at the scoping guidance that we've laid out, that is looking at the self-assessment guidance, and then, of course, meeting with our cyber advisors, right? So not just taking your score that you get from those self-assessments, but actually reviewing that information with the cyber advisors, looking at what that's going to mean in terms of what you need to do to advance in your cyber compliance journey. And so, again, those cyber advisors are at the ready to engage, at no cost to you, and that is huge. If you know anything about cyber advisory consultation, it can be very, very expensive. And so for us to be able to offer that by way of our partnership with DoD Office of Small Business Programs is absolutely awesome. And so when we think about those assessments, those in this case of a prioritized acquisition are going to be uploaded into the Enterprise Mission Assurance Support Services system. And then moving on to level 3, where we're talking about a triennial every 3-year cycle assessment. Again, certification renewal is required. And in level 3, a couple of key things here. We're still talking about CUI, but as I pointed out on another slide, we're talking about CUI that's being handled for the highest priority programs, right? So the highest level of CUI, if you will. Again, all still in the unclassified space. But as such, those assessments are going to be done by what's called the Defense Contract, the Defense Industrial Base Cyber Assessment Center, which is under the Defense Contract Management Agency, or DCMA, as it were. And so I just want to talk about sort of a CMMC compliance journey, right? How is it that if, as a small business, I'm coming into this environment at projectspectrum.io, I register, I get my username, password, I'm all set. And how do I figure out, the sort of trajectory or the roadmap, if you will, right? And one of the things that we're in the process of doing in concert with our director of cyber initiatives is we're actually looking at, okay, how can we further streamline these types of cyber compliance journeys, right? Whether you're a small manufacturer, whether you're just a small business, just coming in to look and leverage the resources there. How do we figure out what your compliance journey would consist of, and then therefore what all the things that would appertain? And so when we think about step one, first and foremost, understanding and being able to select the appropriate level of compliance, right? So the only predecessor to that, again, is first understand the whole ecosystem of CMMC, right? But let's say you understood that and you're saying, okay, well, how do I chart this journey? Well, first we want to understand the appropriate level of compliance. And we're going to know that in part by specifically knowing what types of information or what types of contracts that you might be pursuing that are going to necessitate you handling either federal contract information only, or are you handling controlled and classified information? That's going to give us a really good indication of what level that's most appropriate for you, right? And we'll ask some fact-finding questions in between. That's, again, the efficacy of why those cyber advisors are there. And so when we think about the next step two, conducting the scoping questionnaire. So we've developed a scoping questionnaire, right? Based on the scoping guidance for the respective levels of CMMC that have been published by DoD CIO. What we've done is we've comprised some scoping questions that can give us an idea of what are the right and left delimiters, what's inbounds and out of bounds relative to your compliance journey, right? Once we've done that, then we want to say, let's move to step three, conducting this pre-self-assessment, as we like to call it, right? So still a self-assessment for, in this case, level one, so we're talking about that, but you would still do that. And then what we're able to glean from that, step four, is going to give us the ability to do some gap analysis, right? So we're going to see, of those respective controls, where are you falling short? And so that gap analysis is going to highlight that for us. And that's critical because it's step five. That's going to help us then develop, for example, a system security plan of action and milestones. We can then understand exactly where we need to go for step six to be able to implement those security controls that we've been able to sort of remediate in the interim there. And then step seven, of course, the preparation of documentation and evidence is absolutely critical, right? Not only to check a box, but for your own purposes within your company so that you can know and be able to substantiate exactly how you're meeting the requirements. And again, understanding, being able to show that in the case that you might be audited, right, down the road. So absolutely critical there in terms of the preparation of documentation and evidence. Step eight, ultimately, again, conducting that final self-assessment. So then you've been able to go through at step three, do the pre-self-assessment, right? You've been able to look at that gap analysis, again, glean some insights as to where you have, as we like to call, areas of opportunity, or areas where you're just falling short on those controls. And then, of course, you're going to take in step eight, that final self-assessment that will encompass you having leveraged some of the resources I'm going to talk about here next. And so when we think about federal contract information, we think about controlled and classified information, you have before you kind of what the guidance has been published as. One of the great things about Project Spectrum is where there are some uncertainties, it helps to be able to pick up the phone. It helps to be able to, email someone and be able to have a meeting, right? Where you can actually talk to a live person who's steeped in the technology, who understands cyber, not just from the sort of hands-on, if you will, pen tester, certified ethical hacker, network operations center person or SOC person, but that you can actually talk to someone who understands compliance, right? And the sort of policy element of cyber that is so germane here with respect to not only the NIST standards, which are the parent standards, NIST 853, and then of course you have 800-171 and 172, and then of course the CMMC standards that are sort of derivative compliance arms, if you will, of those NIST standards there. And so the scoping questionnaire, this is just an idea of what it'll look like. We're going to ask some questions based on, again, the level that's been determined, because the scoping questions are relevant to the respective levels of compliance. And so we're going to ask you some questions on that. We want to ask you to answer those questions as candidly as possible, because that's going to help us really get a solid idea of what we need to look at there from a scoping perspective. And then when we think about the pre-self-assessment, as we talked about, again, costs you nothing to do this through projectspectrum.io, which is not the same with a lot of other companies, right? There are a lot of companies that are charging hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, even for the assessments, right? And in some cases, many thousands of dollars, right? But again, in this case, to be compliant, the contractor needs all findings to result in a met or non-applicable status. And so we think about, for example, what you see on the right there. It's just an image of what that pre-self-assessment is going to look like. What we built into it for your benefit is what's called an explainer video. So you see that. I can get my mouse to work here, but if you see that right there, that's a little explainer video that we built in. Again, in this case, only 3.5 minutes long, but it's for authorized access control. So if you had no idea what number one that question was asking you, do you limit system access to authorized users? If you had no idea what that question was asking you, you have not only that explainer video that you see there in the upper right, but you also have a tooltip feature, which we thought was helpful, which again gives you a little more of an explanation of what that entails, and a tip that can help you with regard to being able to meet that particular questionnaire. We think about the performance of a gap analysis. And this is where I think it's absolutely critical what Project Spectrum is doing here. So we're going to produce a findings report for you that in essence shows you exactly where those areas that you're falling short in relative to that level of compliance, right? The scoring methodology, again, is used to produce an assessment score. Businesses are able to use the findings report to begin their gap analysis by identifying control results, identifying those control gaps, and identify those that report a not met or no status, and of course, reviewing Project Spectrum's micro lessons. And those are our training courses. So we have full-length training courses and we have micro lessons. The micro lessons are more CMMC core centric. And so like if you find, for example, that there's an area or a couple of controls that you're not quite meeting, there's usually an area on our site where we can speak to in those micro lessons exactly what those particular controls entail and how best that you can meet those controls, right? And so we think about the alignment of gaps within CMMC level requirements. This is absolutely critical, this feature here. The development of a system security plan and plan of action and milestones, right? A system security plan is developed to address the current protection overview of the security control requirements that have been implemented in the environment. And then, of course, the plan of action and milestones is really designed to correct any deficiencies found and or to reduce or eliminate vulnerabilities. One of the things that we have on projectspectrum.io is we have a training course on both system security plan fundamentals, as well as the plans of action and milestones, what that entails, how to build it out, and we can even help you with templates for that as well. So we think about those micro lessons I talked about earlier. This is kind of an area of the site as far as what that looks like today. We are, and by the way, this is a good point for me to foot stomp, but we are in the process of revamping our site. As I mentioned earlier, we want to really delineate not only that roadmap or those roadmaps, right, respective to what we found as consistent in our research and data as to how best to help companies understand how they would chart their compliance journey using Project Spectrum. But also, again, helping to identify FCI and CUI data, setting clear objectives, determining the resources, establishing realistic timelines. All these things we want to help do here at this step relative to the system security plan, testing and validation, right? Security implementation, monitoring continuous life cycles, and the like. And so that new website, we're planning on having a lot more, whole different makeover is what we're shooting for the benefit of those that are coming in on their respective different levels of compliance. Implementation of security controls. This is another key area here. Critical step towards remediating the gaps. And that is really where, as I say, the rubber meets the road. It's, yes, we've done all this training. We've done all this understanding. We've even leveraged the CMMC course-centric micro lessons. We've leveraged some of the longer form training courses. Now it's time to actually implement the controls, right? And understanding what that entails. And so, again, empowering you as a small business coming into the environment to use those CMMC assessment guides, having that inform your planning and preparation, learning and applying the DoD risk assessment, selecting gap security controls, implementing, remediating in each gap security control, and of course, collecting evidence and updating documentation. As I say, the 4 Ps: plans, policies, processes, and procedures. And so again, what you see on the right there is just sort of a screenshot of the assessment guide. And so again, very, very helpful to help that with that idea of continuous monitoring on your current posture. We know that any given time, where you stand from a cybersecurity perspective is a snapshot in time. And so this Kaizen philosophy that our cyber advisors are embodying as they're advising, which is we have to be constantly, habitually looking at our cybersecurity, our environment, our hygiene, right? Best practices and so forth. Step 7, the preparation of documentation and evidence. I talked a good deal about this, but we're going to help you with all things. For example, looking at your network topology, how your environment, how your network is structured, right? The different types of devices that you're using, right? We know that in the guidance that was handed out on 15 August for the new proposed rule for CMMC, if you guys are tracking that, it's in the Federal Register. You can look it up. But that guidance talked about specific, for each specific device, having controls and things in place for each device that you're using to either process, store, or transmit data, right? Whether it's CUI or FCI, right? And how you have to have each of those devices, meeting the requisite controls and compliance, right? And subject to CMMC ultimately. Well, those cyber advisors can help you understand what that looks like, right? I don't know of anywhere else where you can talk to someone who is certified, who is steeped in the technology, who understands not only the hands-on piece, as I mentioned earlier, of cyber, but also understands the compliance requirements. I don't know where you can talk to someone at no cost and have them talk to you about your specific infrastructure, your specific cyber compliance journey at no cost to you, right? And so this is hugely invaluable, if not for any other reason. Again, understanding plans and planning documents, system, network, and data flow diagrams, system, network, and data configurations, training materials. Again, all that would come at an exorbitant cost were it not for the DoD Office of Small Business Programs and Project Spectrum. We think about step 8 here. Again, conducting that final self-assessment. Currently today, as I mentioned, NIST 800-171 is the order of the day under DFAR 7012. And so when we think about the self-assessment requirement that you need to upload that into the supply performance risk system, that is what the rule is today, right? That's what you have to do today. And we have a blog that actually walks you through the entirety of what that entails. And so again, very, very helpful. Whether we're talking about the procurement integrated enterprise environment, which houses the supply performance risk system, whether we're talking about the sort of the score that's obtained from Project Spectrum self-assessment tools, having you upload that into the supply performance risk system. We have a way and a means by which you can do that. And then again, contracting officers and their representatives shall verify a company's assessment score in the supply performance risk system. We saw this again, doubled down on in the guidance that was handed out again on 15 August of this year. And so again, as we move even ever closer to implementation, and I think we're very, very close, getting registered with Project Spectrum, getting ahead of the curve, not waiting, right? Getting out there, starting with us. Even if you're not, if you have no clue what it is, you're not sure, we can meet you where you are, right? Our cyber advisors are there and at the ready to engage. And so just to recap of some of the resources we talked about, certainly the plans of action and milestones, the Apex Counselor PowerPoint presentation. So we're very closely tied in, as you can see, with the Apex accelerators. but we're doing things all around the country with different proponents for help for small businesses. So we're doing engagements with small business development centers. We're doing that with the Manufacturing Innovation Institutes. I just sat on a panel as part of the Defense Logistics Agency's Industry Collider Day with my good friend Sam Moyer of the Manufacturing Times Digital, or otherwise known as MXD, right? Doing a lot of key and critical work with those small manufacturers as part of DoD, right? So again, those MIIs or Manufacturing Innovation Institutes, the MEP, the Small Business Administration, we're doing collaborations there. We've done cyber collaborations with the National Security Agency's Cyber Collaboration Center, where Morgan Adamski used to be the chief of that. She's now moved on as executive director of Cyber Command. We've had her on our cyber circuit events, which is an event that we do where we pull in industry professionals from within and around the defense industrial base to really share best practices and figure out what are the things that are most germane to small businesses that we think are going to be of most beneficial to them in their cyber compliance journey. Not just to check a box, right? I mean, that's a part of this, meeting the compliance requirements for NIST and for CMMC. But really, it's about writ large about, hey, how do we protect the way in which we're handling data, which we know has reverberating implications to the supply chain writ large and ultimately to our warfighter, right? And so these are critical pieces that sort of inform the urgency of making sure that you're locked in with Project Spectrum as you chart your cyber compliance journey. One of the last things I'm going to talk about is our cyber readiness dashboard. Again, it's a way in which on our site, and we're going to look at ways we can revamp this as well, but it's a way in which you can sort of chart your progression of effort from one self-assessment to the next, which I think is really, really critical. So you come in, you take that pre-self-assessment, you figure out where you've got some gaps, you look at, okay, where on Project Spectrum can I go to speak to these gaps in terms of training and education? We've got that for you. You do that, and then of course, subsequently, you take another final self-assessment at the end, as I showed you. And so you can kind of see where you've improved. You can see where you've not only raised your score, but raised your readiness, more important, right? It's what the score represents that's really key and critical here. And again, whether it's helping you see that progression of effort, or if you want to bookmark an area of the site, you have that capability with that dashboard that maybe you were visiting, maybe you're looking at one of our blogs or white papers or news articles, or just upcoming events. You have all that at the ready to be able to re-engage at a later time, which I think is really, really hugely invaluable. Another thing that we have is we do monthly, or we're getting to a cadence of doing webinars. We used to do them monthly. We're getting back into that cadence and that flow where all things CMMC, at least from a high level, we talk about that on those webinars, more of a training, if you will. But that's a webinar that we do. I think we have one coming up. I don't know if we've locked in yet, but I think we're tracking for 17 August, so just about a little over a month. We'll have another one of those CMMC webinars where we'll do a little bit more discussing where we are in the process and what you need to know about it. So those are just a few ways that we do that. Again, ways that you can connect with us through those training webinars, through the cyber circuit events, where again, we're bringing in those industry professionals, or you can reach out to us at outreach@projectspectrum.io. That mailbox is triaged depending on the type of inquiry, so feel free to send any inquiry relative to Project Spectrum there, and we will divert it accordingly. We think about social media. We're out there on LinkedIn, Twitter, as well as the YouTube channel that we've created, which, by the way, we have sort of a compendium of animated vignette style, short length videos that cover cybersecurity subject matter as well. Again, looking at all different ways we can speak to many different audiences within the small business community, and helping them understand not only that these resources are available, but that they're high and critical to the defense industrial base, and specifically the Office of Small Business Programs. I want to end on talking about how all this ties in. Why is this important? Well, I talked about the warfighter. I talked about the supply chain. There's the National Defense Industrial Strategy, but then there's also the small business strategy, right? And I believe that was published in January, I want to say January of last year. And, one of the critical pieces of that, that Director Mita, our leader for Department of Defense Office of Small Business Programs, talks to very well, is that there's three core objectives. One is the provisioning of a unified management approach, right? Understanding how we streamline small business activity across the whole of the DoD, right? And so that's one piece. The other piece is making sure that what we're doing from a small business perspective, right, all those activities, that there's alignment with national security priorities. That is absolutely critical. And again, as I talked about that sort of symmetry between what we're doing and securing things on our end, and how that relates to the larger goal of securing the supply chain and making sure that the warfighter receives the fruits of the benefits of all these businesses that are in the defense industrial base and the supply chain at large. The third objective is really that outreach and helping to engage with those small businesses, making sure that they know that they have the Apex Accelerator, they have the DoD Mentor Protege program, they have the Indian Incentive Program. They have a myriad of resources that avail themselves through business.defense.gov, which is the website for the Office of Small Business Programs. So making sure that they understand that all those resources are there, and that, of course, they understand the cybersecurity component through Project Spectrum. And so with that, I thank you so very much, and I'm happy to field any questions that we have.
Great. Thank you, Kareem. We do have one question in the chat that has been left for you to answer, and it is coming from Alan Waldo of our Missouri Apex Accelerator. And he would like to know, if a client were to reach out to you at Project Spectrum for assistance, what is the typical length of time before they would be able to work with the organization?
I've got an internal SLA to my team of 48 business hours. So, but usually we're responding much quicker than that, I can tell you. So please reach out to us at outreach@projectspectrum.io. Register with us on the site at projectspectrum.io, and then feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to engage. That should be happening very, very quickly. And so we have a really good, I think, track record and history of the service level agreement in terms of response time.
All right. There was another question in there that a member of your team answered about a CMMC webinar on October 17th, directing them to go to your social media pages for information and getting your newsletter.
Yes, that's great. Yes.
Yeah,
We actually we also recommend that that everyone ascribes to the DoD Small Business Bulletin Digest that's put out through the DoD Office of Small Business Programs. You can also ascribe to that, or subscribe to that, rather, I should say. You can do that through business.defense.gov, or you can join us on LinkedIn for the DoD Office of Small Business Programs page on LinkedIn. That's another good way to get abreast of that Small Business Digest, which has some really good information, including cyber initiatives and things like that that are going on around the DoD.
Okay, now there's a new question in there. I've completed the assessment on your site and forwarded the results to my Apex mentor. Should I continue to work with her for next steps?
I would say yes, right? And that is, yes, definitely stay connected and working with your local Apex Accelerator. But since you've completed that self-assessment, I would say, depending on the results of that, right? If in fact you found that there's some gaps that you'd like to further flesh out and figure out where it is that you should go next, whether it's a training on Project Spectrum, whether it's another conversation, if you will, if you've not already had one with the cyber advisor, I would say definitely follow up with the cyber advisor as part of that next steps, and see what guidance that they have for you based on the results of your assessment score.
Thank you, Mr. Sykes. Now, that's the last question I see in chat. I want to give anybody the opportunity to take themselves off of mute and put their camera on. And go ahead and ask your questions if you would like to do it that way. There was one that's just popped up in chat from Kelly Beverly. I've had a third-party assessment and still uncertain.
Okay, so then if you've had a third-party assessment, then we're talking about CMMC level 2, right? Handling CUI or controlled and classified information at a prioritized acquisition level. So I would say definitely follow up with them, follow up with your assessor. I'm not sure exactly what it is that you're uncertain about, but whatever that is, certainly follow up with them directly. But again, don't hesitate to reach out to our cyber advisement team. They can also field questions that you might have about the process and or next steps given where you are.
Thank you for that. Now, does anybody have any other questions? Like I said, please feel free to take yourselves off of mute and put your camera on and ask Mr. Sykes your questions directly while you have an expert in the house. I see any takers on the questions.
I've actually got one for you if I could.
Please.
Sorry to ask two questions. This is Alan Waldo from Missouri. So I've had situations recently where contracting officers will put out a solicitation, and it really, to me, does not matter what the contract is for. I had one where somebody's looking to do a landscaping project, or basically just do lawn mowing for the Army Corps. And the requirements that they had put into that solicitation was for a NIST 800-171 assessment. And I tried to back them off of that, and they said, "No, you got to have that." I'm thinking, okay, they're mowing the lawn. So at this point, I'm saying, how many people can actually bid on that, and who would want to bid on that? I mean, do you have any recommendations for when you have perhaps an overzealous contracting officer that's pushing for an assessment that may be a lot higher level than they probably actually need? I mean, I was not able to talk logic with this person, but you might have some best practices for us.
Yeah, no, it's a fair question, Alan, and I appreciate the question. And we've gotten this before, right? We've heard. I've traveled around the country as I do these briefings, and I hear from even small manufacturers, right? And they're building maybe something that just has one little cog in sort of a larger tapestry of effort of a project that has to be done, that ultimately is going to go on the F-35 or something, right? And I think it's that perspective, understanding, right, that no matter how small and unrelated it may appear, and again, I don't know the specifics in this particular case, but the first thing I would do is to follow up with the issuing body there. So not just the procurement officer, but maybe there's even someone higher just to validate that in fact that's needed. But if in fact it is, what can often happen is, because I had somebody say, well, we do janitorial services. Why do I have to meet this higher level of compliance for that when I'm just cleaning the areas? Well, I said, well, did you ever stop and think of what parts of that facility that you have access to, right? Or that you can come near to be able to do your cleaning duties, right? And then what the implications might be of that. And so I don't know if that's the case in this landscaping case, that maybe that landscaper has access to a certain area on that installation, right? That would necessitate them needing to meet a higher level of compliance, or if it's just that when they send things. Remember, it's all about whether you're processing, storing, transmitting CUI or FCI. In this case, CUI, we're talking about essentially the same standards that you would be at for level 2 for CMMC, right? And this 800-171, same exact amount of questions, right? And so with that, if there's any, and I do mean any, processing, storing, or transmitting of data pertaining to the handling of CUI, then that alone would necessitate that. So if it's in, I don't know if there's certain information that has to be exchanged, relative to that specific procurement. I imagine that's probably what's precipitating that procurement officer, sort of doubling down on that. But again, it's worth asking the question. I think you're right to do that, to make sure that level of compliance is in fact what's required One of the things that we learned in the guidance that was handed down on 15 August is that those determinations in terms of what those solicitations are going to entail in terms of level of requirement that's going to need to be met is going to be decided very, very intently, right? So that they shouldn't be, if you will, just throwing some higher level of compliance on something just to make sure they're covered down, but that in fact, it's very, very defined and tied to is the prospective offerer going to be handling, processing, storing, or transmitting the attending types of data that would warrant a certain level of requirement there. Hopefully that answers your question.
Hi, Kareem. This is
Hi.
Len Yost with Micro Machine Works in Barlow, Ohio. We are a CNC machining facility, and we're in the process of working on an AS9100 certification. So we no doubt will be looking at a level 2 assessment at some point in time.
Yes.
But initially, the self-assessment, my question is, what level of person does it take to do that self-assessment? Can somebody like me, who has no computer background, do that self-assessment? Or do I need an IT person to do that? So how do I get started and what do I need?
It's a great question there. Thank you for that. One of the things that Project Spectrum we sort of pride ourselves on is and really our cybervisors, right? So when I'm hiring these folks, one of the things I'm looking for again is not just that they have the technical acumen, right? Not just that they understand the sort of technical aspects of what the job is going to entail, but that they also understand, meeting people where they are, right? And so we know, right, just as in the course of just the reality here, that most micro smalls and most small businesses, the smaller of the smalls, right? We know SBA standards are kind of broad there, but the smaller of the smalls, right? The 10-man shop, the 20-man shop, the 50-person shop even, they're probably not going to have an IT director. They're probably not going to have a cybersecurity, a subject matter expert within their company, right? And in case that they don't, that's one of the good things about the cyber advisors, that they can really meet you where you are. So even if you're, a layman of sorts, right? In terms of not really understanding a lot of the technical jargon and so forth, those cyber advisors are there at the ready to be able to engage with you where you are and help you explain. That's also why I mentioned that those explainer videos, and you notice there's a level of rudimentary approach that we take here. And part of that is intentional, right? Because we know that the vast majority of folks that we're targeting, right, specifically those small businesses, right, and medium-sized businesses, that we actually are targeting folks that really need the sort of, hey, I need you to break this down to me in a way that I actually understand it, and in a way that I can, if I put in the effort, I can get furtherance of what it is that I'm trying to do here, right? So to your point, that's another great question and a great benefit of having those live cybervisors as FTEs at the ready.
So is that something I should begin on my own and see where it takes me, kind of explore the path?
I would say so. I would say so, because again, the idea, part of what we're doing here is we're saying, look, we want to try to the greatest extent possible to have you not have to spend any more money than we know you're going to have to. For example, in the case of certification, as with anything with the DoD, or for that matter, the government writ large, whether it's ISO, you just mentioned AS9100, AS9100. I mean, whether it's CMMI, right, any of the other certifications, right, that are sort of standard for doing certain business with the government, we know there's going to be a cost associated with that. What DoD is essentially saying is, hey, start with us, work with us. We can help you understand this in really layman's terms, or as closest to layman's as possible, right? At no cost, right? That way, now at some point, might you have to consult other services? It's possible,
Sure.
right? But what we're saying is there's a great deal that we know beyond a reasonable doubt that's going to be of great benefit to you, even if only in the education awareness, the landscape, so that if you do, for example, let's say you do figure out later on, okay, I got to go meet with a C3PAO. Well, at least you understand the landscape under which that C3PO is going to be operating relative to helping you get to compliance, right? Or to certification, right? So that alone is worth its weight in gold, not to mention the fact that you're able to do a lot of that legwork on the front end at what would otherwise be an exorbitant cost, right?
Sure.
And so that I think is where the great benefit of Project Spectrum is.
So would it be to my benefit to have a computer consultant here when I start that assessment? We contract that out.
Mhm. I would say, honestly, I would say before you do anything else, I would say go ahead and because again, the questions are pretty straightforward. And again, if you don't understand it, you've got that explainer video, you've got the tooltips, and then of course you have the cybervisor guide. I would say go ahead and leverage that first before you do anything else that's going to cost you anything, right? And then you bring those other services in as needed if in fact you believe that it's warranted.
So to do that assessment, I would go to projectspectrum.io and
That's
find
correct.
that self-assessment there.
That's correct. Yes, you're
Great.
gonna go and in fact, why don't I do this? Why don't I? If we have time, Karen, do we have a few more minutes? I'll do a.
We sure do.
Okay, great. I'm going to come out of this, and I'm going to go here. I'm gonna need to move that out of the way. And then I am going to go to projectspectrum.io. All right, so projectspectrum.io, right?
Right, you're not sharing it. It's still your PowerPoint.
oh,
So you might have to
okay.
stop sharing and
Yeah,
then hit
my
the share
window.
button again.
Gotcha. Let's see if we can do
Yeah.
that here. Pardon me.
It's okay.
Yeah, I just feel like this is, the goal is we want to be helpful, right? And if we're not doing that, then what are we really doing here? Is my philosophy, right? And
I
that
also
sometimes-
represent the Appalachian Ohio Manufacturers Coalition, which works with a lot of different manufacturers.
Yeah.
And a lot of them have these same questions, knowing that we're going to have to go to CMMC to work with the government at all in the future. But it's also important to our business, whether we're working for the government or not.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So you're going to go when you get to projectspectrum.io. And by the way, we're speaking of manufacturers. I mean, this is a big part, right, of what we're doing. When we think of the sort of three pillar sectors that Project Spectrum, and for that matter, DoD really is really talking to, it's really knowledge-based services, research and development, and manufacturing, right? When we think about manufacturing specifically, there's a whole set of specific, if you will, application to what it is that we're talking about from a cybersecurity perspective, right? The OT or operational technology perspective is absolutely germane. And we actually, to that end, I'll show you in a second here, we actually have a landing page for the MEP on our site where we have in fact worked with the national MEP as well as many of the local MEPs and created sort of a self-directed platform on the site here with which those small manufacturers can engage. So if you would help me in getting the word out to that, any manufacturing constituency that you have, to please join this. What my team has actually done is we've actually put together some scenarios that walk you through soup to nuts, right, of how it is that you as a small manufacturer would work with us. We've even got some videos that explain kind of that public-private partnership that we have. And again, just walking you through how it would look from soup to nuts, from the point of inception, point you come into us with us, the working with us, the resources, the tools, the training, the cyber advisors, right? All of that. And it sort of walks you through two, if you will, sort of manufacturing scenarios in terms of how you would work with us. So that's another great benefit. I'm glad you reminded me of that. But for the self-assessment, we use cyber readiness check interchangeably with that. And so the cyber readiness check, you're on the resources tab, you're going to click on that. It's going to bring you here. There's a multi-factor authentication piece that's here. Let's see if it's going to cooperate with me. It's always when you're trying to do something here that
Passwords are always painful.
oh my goodness. You got to have them, right? Okay, there we go. So MFA, so I'm going to get a message here. Actually, I just got it. Yep, on my, it's a text message, right? So was that, let's see. Okay, so I'm going to submit that authentication code there. It looks like that all worked out. And there you go, right? So you can see, let's get that out of there. You can see the cyber readiness check, right? So again, CMMC level 1, you can look at the CMMC level 1 scoping assessment, right? You can look at CMMC level 2, the scoping assessment, and of course the actual self-assessment. And then of course NIST 800-171, which is the existing standard. So you're going to go in there, let's say if we were going into NIST 800-171, boom, you're going to go in there, and then everything from access control to system and information integrity and all points in between, we're going to ask you a set of questions, right? And then again, you've got that explainer video, you've got the tooltip there when you hover the mouse over that, right? Authorized users are identified. Do you have a way of identifying authorized users, right? Right, as we talk about, do you limit system access to authorized users, processes acting on behalf of authorized users, and devices? Critical piece, again, all the more important with the guidance that was just handed out there in 15 August, right? So again, we try to ask them in a way that is as close to layman's terms as possible, these questions on the self-assessment. But again, if you're not sure, you've got a couple of resources here to help you out, right? And then most importantly, you've got our cyber advisors that are at the ready. So you fire off an email to outreach@projectspectrum.io and say, hey, I'm struggling with question 3 here. It's talking about, do I, control the flow of CUI in accordance with approved authorizations? Well, I don't know exactly what those approved authorizations might be. And I need a little more clarity on that. Can you help me with that? And they're gonna be able to work with you, right? So that's the benefit of this. I mean, we could have just thrown a compendium of resources online like a lot of these places do. Some of the folks in the compliance space, which is saturated now, right? There was not nearly as many in the space even just 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, if I'm going to be frank, as it related to this. But when we think about where we are now, there's a lot of companies that are charging for this very thing that you're looking at on my screen to be able to do this, to be able to explain this down to you and have tooltips, and then have you be able to reach out to somebody to have a conversation. Again, these are things that would come at an exorbitant cost, but that again, the DoD understands that there's going to be a cost associated with cybersecurity compliance, but it doesn't mean that it has to be that exorbitant cost that it would otherwise be, even just if we were just talking about the preparatory engagement, right? Getting prepared for everything you need for certification.
Well, and small and medium-sized businesses need this kind of support.
That's right.
They need it the most.
That's right. And that's what I'm preaching all around the country. We just did the, like I said, the DLA Industry Collider Day event there. And then shortly after that, we did the Congressional Black Caucus event that we had there, where we're meeting with a lot of federal agencies, talking directly to these small businesses and helping them understand that, hey, you don't have to go this alone, right? This isn't, we don't want to, the goal is to get folks back into the supply chain and not the converts, right? And what we saw with COVID, right, just during those couple of years, was it like 40%, over the last several years, and 40% dropped out of the supply chain. Well, that's staggering, and that has a reverberating impact to our overarching goals, right? National security being chief among them. And so when we talk about the warfighter and leading all this compliance, regulatory thing back, I know it's cumbersome and it can be, just a pain in the butt, right? But when we think about contextually that this is all being done in service of our warfighter and protecting our supply chain and making sure that we're not introducing vulnerabilities unnecessarily by way of the transmission of information from small to large firms, primes, and subs, and of course government agencies. I mean, it's really a no-brainer.
Thank you, Kareem.
Thanks,
Do
Welcome.
we have any other questions? All right, seeing none, I'd like to thank you, Kareem, for your time. Now, I'm going to kind of take a little time here. I want to put in a shameless plug for ourselves. We are going to be hosting an event on October 7th, the Ohio University Apex Accelerator. It's going to be held at our Dublin campus, which is in suburban Columbus, and it is a manufacturing summit. And we are partnering on this manufacturing summit with the DLA Office of Land and Maritime, and also leaders from the Ohio, DOD's Office of Small Business Programs and DLA Land and Maritime are going to be in attendance. So it's an opportunity for you to meet with those individuals one-on-one and get to know them and learn what's happening on DLI Land and Maritime. They are looking for new entrants from manufacturers to bid on that work. As Kareem said, we've been seeing a shrinkage. And so come out there. I'm going to put the link in the chat to our website. And I'm doing that right now. And details on how to register and attend this event are going to be on that website. Just scroll down and you'll find it. And I'm also going to give I have partners in crime here from the Apex Accelerator Program, my other co-hosts. If you don't mind, I'm going to put you all on the spot. You can take yourselves off of mute and put your cameras on and introduce yourselves and offer any other shameless plugs for any opportunities that you have coming up for our attendees. Missouri, Southern Ohio, don't be shy.
Well, I do know that we offer a monthly introduction to federal contractor, introduction to contracting course, and typically an online course for socioeconomic certifications, both on a webinar and kind of a bi-monthly basis. Those are probably the bigger events we got coming up right now. So,
And could you put the link to that in our chat, Ellen?
yeah, let me find it. I'm gonna go on mute and off camera for a second to find it. So.
Okay. Jana, are you still on, or Anne? Are they being shy? All right, I don't see Jana on here anymore. Well, thank you, Ellen, for putting that in. Again, I put the link to ours in the chat. So other than that, if anyone doesn't have any other questions, Kareem, thank you. Thank you to you and your team providing us this information. Always a pleasure to host you. And a big thank you to my co-sponsors from the Southern Ohio Apex, Arkansas Apex, and Missouri Apex. Thank you for being co-sponsoring this with us today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. And Karen, I promised to work on my dance moves. Apparently I've set set quite the bar here after small business
Well,
training.
you did it to yourself at the Meta Protege program. You did it to yourself. I was impressed.
You got to keep them engaged. I look, it's when you've got that great of a speaker set that we had there, right? All the coalescence of all the resources you guys on hand. I mean, we need folks to hear that information, and they can't be on their phones and sleep. So if I got to do a little moonwalk in there, and that's what we're gonna do.
What, you had me dancing in my chair, sir.
All right, take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
And I'll be sending the recording will be posted on our website, and we will send a copy of the slide to all our attendees. So thank you again.
Super, thanks.
Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.